a small group, so I understand if you need to modify to make this a bit more casual back and forth. I don't want you to feel like big pressure to do a large group with a small group.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. So
yeah, jump in at any point with questions.
Yeah.
Well, it's not letting me put all of the questions in the chat, but once I put the first few in, we can go ahead and get started, and I'll add the rest later. So we are here with Collin Davidson. You want to go ahead and introduce yourself, Collin?
Yeah, sure thing. So I'm Collin Davidson. I'm a clinical psychologist, and I work for Lyra Health for my full-time job, which is basically a supervising role of licensed providers for an EAP/mental health tech company. So we have a nationwide presence, and it's a fully remote job. And then I also have a private practice that focuses primarily in financial therapy and also anxiety treatment. I'm from Minneapolis originally, and we moved from Minneapolis to Louisville almost exactly 2 years ago now. Let's see, I have 2 kids and a wife. My kids are still fairly young, so they keep us pretty busy. But they're coming into their own as well and showing their interesting personalities. And yeah, I think that's the main piece of the introduction.
Good, thank you. So you were recently featured on the Kentucky Psychologist podcast. What was it like to be featured?
It was fun. I know Sam a little bit from my work with KPA, but it was, I think, a big part of what I'm trying to do now that I have this certified financial therapist designation is to just like get the word out a little bit. It's just such an unknown field, really. Like most mental health professionals I talk to have not heard of it, and most financial professionals I've talked to have never heard of it. So I think that was kind of my main aim in participating in that, is just so people are aware of it. And also kind of to Rachel's question earlier, like how can you integrate discussion of finance into therapy, even if you don't have additional training?
Good. Yeah, I think we can, I definitely think for me personally in my clinical practice, money definitely comes up. So money is a big stressor for a lot of people, and it makes sense that you would have some additional information, and it's not really provided specifically it wasn't provided in my graduate studies. So it's good to have some backing for what you're discussing in session, and know that you're sort of on the right track. So I really appreciate you being willing to talk more about your practice.
Yeah, for sure.
So part of the reason I wanted to do this series, what I hope will become a series, is just so that we can see what Kentucky has to offer as far as niche psychology, and sort of spread the wealth of knowledge to people that don't know those niches exist or don't know much about them. So thanks for being the first one, Collin.
Happy to.
Okay, so I did post the questions in the chat, and then it looks like there was one added in, so that's good. So you've gone over the introduction. So your niche area is called financial psychology, is that correct?
Financial therapy.
Okay.
And it's a little confusing because there's also financial counseling, which is actually very different. Those are more financial professionals who are really good with like debt counseling and really specific nitty-gritty of like, how do you get out of debt? If you need to file for bankruptcy, what do you do? And they're often available free of cost through different organizations in some communities. But financial therapy is basically an integration of the fields of psychotherapy and financial planning or personal finance. Basically, the reason it started was in the aftermath of the 2008 financial crisis. And people noticed there was just this big gap. Like clearly finances are not just about numbers and following a plan, right? And as we know, as psychologists, everything that involves behavior change is difficult. Like I just switched the time I eat breakfast because I realized I wasn't hungry at the time I normally do, and now I keep forgetting to eat or take my vitamins, and that's a very simple behavior, right? But if we think about something as wide ranging as financial wellness, that's really hard to change. Whether it's spending habits, whether it's even just checking your budget, whether it's having a discussion with a loved one about shared finances, those are all like difficult and anxiety laden topics. And so people often avoid them, and it's not as simple as a planner coming to you and saying, here, do these things and you'll be in good shape based on your goals. Often there is a history involved with money from our childhoods or past difficult experiences around money that get in the way of making changes. So that's what financial therapy aims to do, is to kind of see it as a twin approach of what are the emotional and behavioral and thought-based impacts to your financial wellness, as well as some fundamental educational and problem-solving pieces around finances. So like, how do you create a budget, for instance? How much money should you save? Things that are considered general consensus in the financial community with a CFT additional training is fair game to discuss in therapy. But there are also like limits to the competencies, of course, too. I can't go in and I would never say, hey, buy this stock or sell that, right? Or, you know, here's your financial plan that I've created. That's clearly outside the bounds of my competency. But there are financial therapists who come to financial therapy not from a mental health background, but actually from a financial professional background. And they may have the existing competency to do that more complex financial work with a client.
Do they call what they do financial therapy then as well?
Yeah, exactly. And at one point it was more there was, I think it was almost like 3/4 of the membership of the Financial Therapy Association was financial professionals who had gotten this additional training in mental health, which is very limited compared to what we're used to. But now it's more of a 50-50.
Mhm. That's really that's an interesting way to get to becoming a therapist.
Yes. And of course,
Not
they would
typical.
have their similar competencies, right? Of like, I'm here to talk about just the financial and emotional piece. If it goes beyond that, I'm going to refer you elsewhere.
That is really fascinating. So, I think it would be good for us to go ahead and jump into the meatier questions, just so that we have plenty of time. So can you give so you gave some examples. Do you have any additional examples of things that you would work with your clients on?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think like the broadest buckets are basically individual cases that I'm seeing, and then couples. So maybe in some ways the couples is there's more similarities in the cases I've seen where there's some conflict over money in the couple.
Mhm.
And this is probably not a surprise to anyone who's been in a relationship. And we know that, you know, the divorce rates are pretty high around money issues, actually, is one of the biggest contributors to divorce. So I've had, you know, cases where there's a disagreement around spending is pretty common. Often couples are coming in and they don't really have a strong grasp of their basic financial picture. Like, what does our overall money in, money out, or budget each month look like? And then you can understand that there could be a lot of disagreement because they don't have that basic understanding of what their finances look like. Is it okay to spend this money on fishing or whatever the hobby is, right? That they're arguing about. How much money should we save for a kid's education? Those are kind of the things that can come up, just trying to get people on the same page. And that can be exacerbated if there's a dynamic that one is more of a tightwad and one is more of a spendthrift. There's a book actually that just came out on this topic with that title, Spendthrifts and Tightwads. That's really good, that I could recommend. So how do you help couples that come to money from a very different point of view? Those who blow money very easily and those who are very hesitant to spend money.
Mm-hmm.
So Felita has a question here too. Working with couples, and there are often conflicts regarding spending choices, different values around money management and stress. So yeah, maybe just to elaborate on that a little bit, I would recommend that book, Spendthrifts and Tightwads, that just came out, because it does have some practical ideas in there. But I think a key part is to just hear out both members of the couple around what are your goals financially, what are you hoping for, what are your fears around money, why are your goals important to you, get into the values piece. Sometimes it's helpful to have them answer like, what do you actually admire about your partner generally, but in specific related to your money management? Because often they're just clashing over the differences, but there may be a piece that they haven't acknowledged that, yeah, they are good at, categorizing the different spending that we're having each month, so we know what our picture looks like. I don't know how far down do you want me to go as far as like spendthrifts and tightwads, but like if there is that dynamic, some of it is making the spending more salient or obvious to them, which is actually kind of hard now because you can pay with your phone, you can pay with a card, but could they start spending some money in cash? That makes it much more salient. Or could they like track with pen and paper each time they spend something to make it more obvious? And then the opposite is true for the tightwad, that you want it to be less salient because they're already so uptight about spending money. And so could you make it a little easier to spend money on things that they should be spending money on?
So the question did come up, how do you broach this topic of money with clients? It sounds like the ones who come to you specifically for finance, they already expect that you're going to ask them questions about that. But me as a more generalist psychologist, or, working with patients who have other issues, finances do come up. And so do you have any suggestions for how to weave it in there or set it, like what treatment goals make sense or what treatment goals to discuss with patients to add to the treatment plan?
Yeah, great question. So I think one thing I have on my intake form that I would have, even if I have basically the same intake form, whether it's a more traditional like therapy case or a financial therapy case. And something that you could consider adding is basically like a brief question. I think mine says like, how would you characterize your general financial picture? Poor, good, or poor, fair, good, just to get a basic. Now you're already asking about finances. I have something that's more detailed that I could share, that's basically a checklist around different types of financial, or we could call them money disorders is what they're called in the field. So things like financial dependence, you rely on other people for your money, financial enmeshment, your finances are tied up too deeply with perhaps a son or a relative in some way, overspending, those kinds of things. So I have this checklist that already helps me highlight, oh, they may be financially avoidant. Let me ask more questions around that. I don't know if you want to go that deeply as a generalist, but I think like certainly I would consider as part of my interview, like in the psychosocial category, just asking like more about what is your financial picture like? Do you feel stress around your finances? Are you worried about some aspect of your finances? And I think that could be enough just to get a general idea of what's going on there.
Another question, like you said, with couples, one couple might see it as a problem, the other might not. So asking, does your partner see
definitely
or feel stress about finances could be a good question to ask too, it sounds like.
And maybe just as like the second part of that question is like, what do you do to intervene? I think it's a little harder as a generalist because like I already feel some level of constraint in my role because I'm not a financial professional, right? That's not my home discipline, so to speak. So I think, discussing, being aware of what the stresses are certainly is within bounds. If there are financial stressors, like I can't pay the bills, and then like an obvious place to go is problem solving with them. You don't have to be a professional in the world of finance to say like, oh, your utilities are going to get cut off. What are the social services available in the area that could help you with that, right? That's a maybe low hanging fruit part of it. I think it would be certainly within the realm if it's like around spending or budgeting. If they don't have a budget, right, you could say, why don't you do a quick search, or we could do it together for like a budgeting app that you could use. And there's some that are free out there, just so they could get a picture of the financials on a monthly basis. Now, much beyond that, you probably wouldn't be giving advice around like what should you be doing or not, but maybe you offer referrals to a financial professional or financial therapist. You could potentially suggest like self-help books around financial, personal finance. I personally like Personal Finance for Dummies. That's what took me, honestly. Like, I was a very financially avoidant person, and luckily I was also a tightwad, so I like saved my money. At least I didn't blow it all, but I also like missed out on opportunities. And so I went from knowing nothing about finances to feeling like reasonably competent from reading that book. And it's very comprehensive. It's not just like a basic introduction. It actually covers a lot of topics in that book. So just like a psycho-ed approach in that way.
So that is getting into one of the other questions about like what prompted you to become interested in this. But before I ask you to answer that question, it sounds like you have some resources that you could potentially share that,
Yeah.
not just financial psychologists would
Mhm.
have, or financial therapists would have. So, do you want to email those to me and I can maybe post them in community?
Yeah, definitely. I
Okay.
have
And
a blog on my website that I actually started to write just because I was, telling the same clients or different clients the same things. And I'm like,
mhm.
I can say, here's like a cognitive approach to beliefs around money. And I have a
Mm,
few different ideas there. I have one around like where to start with learning about personal finance and things like that. So I could definitely send you those things.
great. Thank you. Do you have anything about what would be like psychoeducational information about basic concepts of finances that you share with your clients?
I actually haven't done that yet because it's been much more targeted. Um, I think if I had someone come in who really just had no clue, like I would probably say, why don't you get a book like this? And you can also consider other books. There's just so many personal finance books out there, right? But I
Mhm.
recommend two that I've read and that I think are broad. They don't give any unusual advice. Everything they're saying in there is broad consensus. Like, how much should you be saving? Do you need insurance of different types? How do you invest for retirement? How do you save for education? Like, there's a lot of broad consensus in those areas. And so the Personal Finance for Dummies and the other is called the Index Card, and that has some subtitle, but it's basically comes from the idea that everything you need to know about personal finance can fit on an index card. And it has, I think, 10 rules of personal finance. And those books really overlap a lot. They give a lot of the same advice.
Well, that sounds pretty comprehensive and, user friendly for sure. So
Yeah,
thank
exactly.
you for those resources.
Hmm.
So, let's see. Okay, so we started getting a little bit into what drew you to the field, the niche area. So do you want to share a little bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. I actually had heard about it through a New York Times article. I want to say it was probably about 2 years ago now. And I think because, like I mentioned earlier, I was financially avoidant, it was like, for whatever reason, I don't actually have like, I feel like I would have had a reasonably secure childhood. There was no like financial trauma, but anytime the issue of money came up, I just like felt like, oh, I don't understand it. I don't really want to think too much about it. I'm just going to save as much money as I can and hope everything works out. Um, so I think because of that, and then my interest in treating anxiety disorders and exposure therapy, I was like, this is like a natural fit for my interests. And then my journey too of going from being completely, mostly clueless, I guess I could say, to learning quite a bit just through reading one book. It really kind of made me devoted to thinking like, this really isn't as complicated as it seems to be from the outside. And a lot of people could get to a place of like being much more financially secure if they just knew some basics. So I read more about it. I read a kind of popular press version of financial therapy, which is I think called the Money Mammoth, just to make sure I was actually very interested in it before I spent the money to get the certification and took all the time to study for the test and those kind of things. I just got more and more interested the more I learned. And now that I'm actually seeing clients since the beginning of this year, it's just very rewarding to see, like it's very obvious when people are making advances. One of the guys I'm working with who had problems with spending spent literally every cent he earned every month, no retirement savings, nothing. And now he's cut some of his expenses. He started to get a 401k match with his company. Him and his wife are starting to plan for some shared financial goals. So like that's 4 sessions in and he's made all these changes. So it's just cool to see those changes relatively rapidly and very concretely. Like it's very obvious these changes are happening.
So it sounds kind of like, maybe money can't buy happiness, but good financial planning maybe can.
Yes. I think if it's done well, yeah, I mean, I think it can create a sense of like a life well lived. If you're not
Yeah,
constantly.
it's about values.
Yes,
Yeah.
definitely.
Yeah, so it sounds like that's an area of passion for you, is just like seeing that change in your clients and watching them go from, highly financially anxious to feeling more financially free.
Exactly.
And is there anything else that really drives you in this field, or is that change the primary one?
I mean, I think finances just touch so much of people's lives, and it's like such a taboo topic. It's like one of those things that, like Rachel was saying earlier, like it's almost like impolite to discuss finances. And a big part of it, actually, when you're doing the training for financial therapy, but I think is broadly applicable, is like understanding your own reactions to finances and your own hangups around it. So I think that's just useful to know, like, oh, when someone brings up money, this is how I react in a therapy session. That might be interesting because I might lead them a certain direction inadvertently if I don't examine my own relationship with money and my own history with money.
Yeah, that's a great point, is to make sure that the counter transference is kept in check and at least observed and utilized and worked through on our own end, for sure.
Yes.
That's a good point. I really appreciated Rachel's second question as well. She asked, how do we talk to parents about talking to their children about financial stress and how to stop the cycles, avoid the parents' previous pitfalls? So, I mean, I work with kids as well, and I definitely see that some parents really do have those conversations, and other parents have zero financial conversations with kids, and it really does not. I think it cuts through socioeconomic status. So, any ideas for that?
Yeah, it's such a good question. I think there's danger on either end of like a continuum of openness about money, where like saying nothing about money clearly has harms, because especially as kids get older, if there is financial stress in the family, they're going to pick up on it. And there's some big stress that the parenting figure is exhibiting or experiencing, and they're not giving me any information about it. The other end of the spectrum, though, is also damaging if a parent really goes into too much detail. Yes, I'm $30,000 in debt and I might lose my job next week. And, you could see how incredibly stressful that would be for a child to hear, who doesn't fully understand everything and has no agency to help with the problem. So I think some level of middle ground is most useful, of, saying, mommy's a little worried about money, but don't worry, I'm going to take care of it. It's nothing for you to be concerned about. You'll always have somewhere to stay. I'm making sure you're going to get fed, and whatever the specifics are with the kid, right? Of basic information and then reassurance, I guess, would be a concise way of saying it. Because you don't want to get too enmeshed, just like with other things. You don't want your child to be your therapist in any way of like discussing the problems in the marriage or things like that. And with finances, it can just create a ton of anxiety and panic. I don't know if, so some of this is around like changing habits, like if a parent is in debt or overspending or things like that. Some of it would be, I would defer, of course, to those of you who work with kids. I don't work with kids directly in my practice, but developmentally appropriate levels of education, I think. And there's a book, I'll have to look up the title later, that I read that's really great. It's for parents, about like how to teach your kids about finances. Some of it, I think one of the big messages is like, if you can give an allowance, even if it's very small allowance, and then have them create 3 jars. One is for spending on things they enjoy or that are important to them, so you're teaching them that piece. One is for saving, and then one is for giving to like maybe a charity of their choice or something like that. And that creates like some fundamental awareness of like, how do you manage money? And then
That would be a great resource for sure.
Yeah.
I have a 11-year-old, and it's like prime time to be having these conversations.
Yes, definitely.
And from what I am tracking from parenthood, it seems like now's the time, because we just had a conversation about Robux and why it maybe isn't the best use of a $20 bill to go buy Robux so he can buy a limited edition truck for Roblox. So
Yes.
I mean, and that's my value. Somebody else might have a different value. So I think it's a personal preference based on values, but nevertheless important discussions to have with kids.
It's almost like an encyclopedia-like format. It's very short, but it has things like Tooth Fairy. What do we do about the Tooth Fairy? How much is enough? I mean, it's just a great resource in that way. So I think that would be a good thing to consider. And I think as kids get older, like I still have memory. My parents didn't give me a lot of financial advice, but the things they told me I do still remember. Like, you got your first credit card, always pay it in full. Save money if you can. And so I think like those basic messages, one thing I think would be great. I don't know how out there these types of programs are, but like just financial literacy classes or courses or videos for kids would be awesome, just as they get older, to learn some of the basic lessons of personal finance, so they don't get themselves into like debt or other bad positions when they get older.
Yeah, I remember having in my home ec class in high school that we did discuss, balancing a budget and that kind of thing. It wasn't nearly as in depth as, needed for adulthood, but at least it was something, and it got the curiosity going as far as finances go. But
Yeah.
I'm not sure that exists in most schools anymore. I don't know for sure, but that would be great to have the resource to have those, like, on how to have those discussions with kids.
Definitely.
So thanks. So what are some of the most challenging aspects of your work, and what advice do you have to others who are interested in providing the specialist services you offer?
I mean, the first thing that comes to mind, honestly, is around just like boundaries of competence. Like, I feel like I'm constantly weighing, if a client asks a question, like for instance, I had a client ask a question around how exactly now that I have this credit card debt, how exactly does the APR map onto like my monthly payment? And I was like, I mean, that's like a thing you can find a fact-based answer. There's not multiple answers to that. So I had to actually go look it up because I couldn't remember the details of it. I'm like, is it the percentage of each monthly payment? Right. But I was able to look it up and give him that. But I do feel like for me, being relatively newer to the field, I'm constantly balancing, like, am I okay to answer this question, or is this something that requires someone who has more financial knowledge than me? Whereas, I've been doing more standard, psychotherapy for long enough that I feel like I've already figured out my competency domains and what's outside my competencies. The financial stuff I'm still kind of learning as I go, and in talking to other financial therapists, it seems to be a very common theme. And then you said advice about people who want to get into the field. I would say to just read more about it. It's getting more press lately. If you just search for financial therapy on like Google News and read a few articles about what it entails, you could get a sense of if you're interested, because it does. I'll also send along the Financial Therapy Association website. It has all the details around like what are the requirements, what are the costs. Luckily, I was able to get reimbursed for probably about half or 2/3 of the cost through my work, but it's not cheap. So I think you really want to make sure that you're interested. There's also like a continuing education thing you need to do once you have the certification. And the test is fairly challenging, actually. So you need to do quite a bit of studying, not just on the financial therapy part, but really detailed financial concepts that really I probably wouldn't ever use in my practice, because it's much more the realm of true financial professionals.
I see.
So you just want to make sure you're really interested if you want to go that route. It's also true, I just read recently in a Wall Street Journal article, there's only 100 certified financial therapists. So
Wow.
there's been people who've been doing this though for much longer. It's just the
Are you
CFP designation wasn't created until like 2015 or 2016.
Are you taking the same certifications as a financial advisor?
No,
They're different.
yeah,
Okay.
it's the certified financial therapist, which
Okay.
is, it has several different areas. One is mental health, one is financial therapy, and the other's essentially like general finance.
hmm I figured there would be some additional components, but I wonder how much those overlap as far as like how in depth
Yeah.
do you actually get? I guess you'd have to be a financial advisor to know.
Yeah, I haven't actually looked at like what is a requirement for like a certified financial planner, for instance, but I think they have to have much more like specific actual experience, kind of like we do in mental health, of like actual hours accumulated and things like that, and probably much more wide range knowledge than we have. I would say though, even if you don't want to go that route, I think a lot of this, like I'm a CBT therapist primarily, and a lot of the like emotional side of things I'm doing is not really that different from what I would do with someone who's anxious about flying or whatever, like challenging thoughts related to financial anxiety, exposure to something they've been avoiding if they have a lot of fear around paying a bill or checking with the IRS, how much money do I owe, those kind of things. So I think you could start to wade into some of that, and always consult, of course, if you felt like you were getting too far out of your depth.
Yeah. So it sounds like, I mean, we've answered a few of the other questions to a certain degree about what are the requirements for education to work in this field. Um, do you have a link to the certification website?
I think,
Okay.
I have it here actually. I can just put it in the chat. And it's
Okay.
specifically the part about becoming a CFT if you want to see that laid out.
Okay. I'll share that on community as well. Include that over there. My goal is to keep this within the like to wrap up by quarter of, just to keep it
Mhm.
in the spirit of a lunch and learn, make sure people have time for self-care in that last
Yeah.
quarter hour. So let's see, let's make sure that we just cover all the things that we set out to cover today. But before I do that, is there anything that I haven't asked that you think would be really important for us to chat about?
I think I mean, I've said a lot of the stuff that I think would be helpful. I can't think of anything like right off the top of my head.
Okay. Um, so let's see. You did mention your work paid for part of your training.
Mhm.
Um, so, but you also have your private practice where you work in this niche as well. So, what setting do people who have this specialty typically work in?
Yeah, that's a good question. It seems like the ones I've talked to, I've reached out, and it's a very friendly community, I think, because it's so small. So there's like a big academic contingent. So people who actually, they're professors, they study financial therapy concepts, they publish, things like that. And then there's some who are in private practice. I think that's probably those two camps are most of the people. Interestingly, I talked to a guy he's a CFT, but he also was a financial professional before becoming a therapist. So he can do all the detailed financial planning stuff. And when I was talking to him, he was saying there's not a lot of interest in like CFTs working in a financial firm. So you're probably not going to find people like us working for some financial therapy practice, or I'm sorry, some financial planning practice. His thought was they just can't quite get their minds around what exactly we're doing. I've
That
been
was
networking.
honestly my first thought, because
Yeah.
like, oh, well, a financial therapist could potentially work for an Edward Jones or
Mhm.
a big bank or something like that. But you're saying they don't get it, or they aren't really like seeing what we do or
Yeah,
what
this is
you.
based on, his name's Ed Combs, and he tried to like kind of reach out and network with people that way, and it just kind of kept running into closed doors, basically.
Hmm.
Now he even acknowledged it's possible other people are having more success than he had. But I think it does speak to, it's not an easy sell. And I think like generally financial therapy has a marketing problem. Like, I think if I switch my website around to be like, I treat anxiety and depression, I think I would get a lot more people through Psychology Today than I do for financial therapy, because no one is out there. They haven't heard of it. They don't know how to search for it, but everyone's heard of anxiety and depression, right? So I think it's like getting the word out and helping people understand how it could be useful.
So making it part of the package, because my next question is going to be, have you found any particularly useful ways of marketing, which I think cuts across specialty areas, but also
Mm-hmm.
some of what you're suggesting is going to be unique to financial therapy.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm trying to keep it small so it takes some of the pressure off me for like, oh my gosh, like I consider a full caseload basically like 4 clients. So I've been able to do that. And it seems like the people are finding me through my website, through searches. They're finding me through Psychology Today. And then there's a lot of like people I've never met who are social workers or psychologists who saw me on like a networker post or something like that, and then their clients bring up financial issues and they say, oh, I saw someone who does that kind of work, let me refer them that way. Versus I haven't gotten anyone, like I told all my colleagues, like, hey, I'm doing this and I don't know for sure, but it's not like my friends in Minnesota, I haven't seen like, oh, it's from Sandra in Minnesota, my colleague from my first job or something. So it's just seemed kind of random.
I could see how some financial planners and like financial like wealth management companies maybe wouldn't want somebody like you there, just because I feel like part of their job is sales.
Yes.
They are on some level trying to sell people on packages, and I see those commercials about we're a fiduciary and we don't make money unless you do and all that stuff, but they really are trying to get you to put your money into what they're doing. So
Yeah.
on some level, if you're conflict of interest, kind of like, yeah, well, let's look at your priorities and let's look at your values and let's see if that really fits with the long-term plan that you have, that they might be like, yeah, we don't want this guy in here.
That's a good point for sure. I mean, I think if you think of it as like behavior change for finances, like I'm sure there's a lot of planners out there who are like recommending something that is in the best interest of a client and they just don't do it.
Yeah.
They don't follow through, or they're hesitant because of their fears or whatever. That could be a good partnership there. I found some openness among like a couple local to Louisville financial planners who are also like very socially conscious and kind of do some of this work themselves naturally. But I'm guessing if I went to a more traditional firm, they'd probably be a little more resistant for those reasons.
Yeah. This is really helpful.
I was also.
Oh, I was just gonna. I don't want to get in the way if you're Ashley. You're.
That's okay. Go
moderating. I wasn't really sure what to expect when I got on here, and but this is helpful because I mean I just got off telehealth session right before this with a client whose family has become financially dependent on them. So it kind of fit like maybe some of the financial enmeshment stuff that we talked about.
Yes.
And a lot of my thing is not the finance piece of it, but like setting boundaries
Yeah.
and, deciding based on their values, how much to help and how much to not kind of enable, and create more of a problem. And then again, with the couples work, so much of that is, differences in how money is being spent. And, I'm going to definitely check out this book, The Spendthrifts and Tightwads.
Yeah.
I think that could be quite helpful. But a lot of folks that I'm working with have issues with their partners around how the finances are handled. And I can't always speak to the details of helping them create like a budget together, or much of mine is more about open communication and expressing themselves and getting kind of their values out there, but not the knowledge about finances. So
yeah, that's a great point. That's exactly like in the realm of what makes sense to touch on, I think, either for a financial therapist or someone who's just in the mental health field. And it actually, the book I mentioned, that Spendthrifts and Tightwads, he talks about account structure being full transparency on the big picture. So there's like one account that both people in the couple are on, and they see where all the money's going. But to prevent fights over trivial things, like let's say we have $100 fund money each a month to spend on whatever we want, create separate accounts that get funded each month $100, and then only rarely would you have transparency into each other's fund money accounts, because then it could be, why are you buying another bike helmet? Like, you just got one a couple of years ago. You really need to spend $300 on a bike helmet?
Right.
And it's like, if the person saved up for 3 months, who cares if they're buying a bike helmet? You might have spent it on something else that they think is trivial. So you avoid some of those arguments, but then also both couples are in on the big picture of what their finances look like.
Yeah, that makes sense. And you take referrals for couples, right?
I do, as long as it's specific to finances. I don't do like broader couples therapy.
Yeah. Okay.
So I actually have had a couple different couples cases who are seeing me and a general couples therapist at the same time, which has been useful, I think, because we can say, oh, this seems like a broader issue. Talk to your couples therapist about that. Let's stay focused on this goal that you brought up.
Yeah, I may have somebody for you.
Oh, great.
Okay. I'll
Yeah,
stop.
thank you. That's okay. No, I appreciate you adding, that info and like what you were taking in from the session, because I just think I really enjoy learning about all the different things that psychologists are doing around the state, and I hope that more people step up to talk about the interesting and unique things that they do in their practice, because I'm sure, everybody does something a little bit different or finds their caseload to have some shift that others don't. So I didn't say it in the beginning, but I should probably introduce myself. I'm Ashley Belcher. I'm a psychologist in Louisville, Kentucky, working in private practice. And I'm hoping to continue this series to talk up psychology in Kentucky, because I think we have a lot of really cool people doing really cool stuff. So we are right at sort of time. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording unless anybody has anything else that they wanted to add before we wrap up.
No, just thanks for the conversation. I look forward to the next series that you put on.
Yeah, I haven't listened to the podcast yet, but I'm looking forward to that as well. I probably should have done that, but with the holiday and everything, it was
No problem. I haven't listened to it either, but I guess I was there when it was recorded.
You know what you said, probably.
Yeah.
All right. Well, have a great week, everyone. And I will be posting this on Community.
Sounds great. Thanks, Ashley.
Thanks.
Thank you.